Hey, Michael J.
So we talked a lot about different historic decks last week with the Zendikar Rising Championship, but there are a ton of other historic decks that we haven't talked about, and some of them are pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the online metagame has continued to evolve, and it's kind of this interesting state where, like, as we talked about last week, by far the most dominant defining deck of the format is Sultai or Sultai Splash Yasharn Uro decks, which are a good 30% even of the just online metagame, and half of the high level metagame. But once this is one of those formats that's like, okay, there's a one deck format ostensibly, but this is actually an area that's something of a specialty of yours, right? Like when there's a deck to beat.
Oh, that's my favorite. I love when there's like a dominant deck, say for sake of argument, you have a rock, paper, scissors metagame where everybody's just on, good old rock, nothing beats rock. And you're like, not only are you paper, but you're the kind of paper that either wins the paper mirror match or like sideboards and you can always beat scissors after sideboarding. Maybe even if it's only for 1 week, but you can do it. Like, that's literally my favorite. I love when I have good cards, when I have a good deck, but like maybe people aren't like they because the other deck is good, right? Rock is really good. It's not controversial that those are good cards. But this is also good, and this is different, and it happens to beat Rock. Yeah, that's what I like.
So the format at the moment is kind of this the paper rock scissors. It's kind of interesting. 1/3 of the metagame is Uro, Sultai or Sultai X, and then a third of the metagame, and then a third of the metagame is goblins and sacrifice. The various Phyrexian tower decks, and then the other third of the metagame is every random rogue deck under the sea, most of which are not that good. But if you can find the right recipe, like what you have to target. Uro is the top target, but interestingly, you can't just prey on Uro, goblins, and sacrifice, though, because you're talking about a format that has other as a solid third.
Yeah. The thing
what do you do in a format like that?
Cynically, you make the best Uro deck. However,
that's what I do.
Here's the thing that's real tough. If you look at the Uro deck or the Uro Yasharn Splash deck, it's kind of got you. If your creatures, they've got fast removal in like Fatal Push, Aether Gust. They have like a banned 2-drop in Growth Spiral, right? But then if your control, it's so difficult to kind of like keep pace with their card quality, because not only do they have Uro himself, which is both a card advantage engine and a way to win, right? And other things, right? But it's another kind of card advantage, gosh. But like, even if you're like, oh, okay, this is a big spell deck, I'm gonna Aether Gust or otherwise counterspell their Nissa, they have cards like Hydroid Krasis that are just resistant to most types of control. Like, you don't want to be using 1-for-1 removal on a Hydroid Krasis, and you also can't counter it.
Not effectively.
So, just cynically, I think that the Yasharn deck was a good example of, all right, here's a dominant strategy in the Uro macro archetype. Here's a little bit more card advantage that we have in Yasharn himself, where you're like, okay, rock, paper, scissors. I'm gonna be rock, but maybe I'm rock that's a little bit better against paper, right? That I think isn't that a little bit different way of looking at it. That when maybe the deck that's trying to go after you is a Skirk Prospector deck or a Phyrexian Tower type deck, you have Yasharn there who can help shut off a card like Skirk Prospector. So it's a little bit different. So it's like, I'm rock, but I'm good against paper.
Did you have any catch Takahashi Iwasaki's Bant Uro deck, attempting to level the metagame. And actually, I think Okuyama actually played something similar, but the Bant approach kind of gives up all of that black spot removal and then tries to cover for it with, you still have Yasharn, but you're playing Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Wrath of God. Plus, you got a few miscellaneous things, like Dovin's Veto instead of Negate. You've got Baffling End and Seal Away. But for the most part, you're in it for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Wrath of God.
So, one of the things we talked about last week, even though Azorius was the deck that was played by the winner of the big tournament, one of the things I was like, hey, I'm not super a big fan of Azorius because I feel like just the Yasharn deck with black, however you want to look at it, Sultai centered deck, can do a lot of the things the Azorius deck can do, but this chooses not to, right? Like, it has blue mana, it has white mana, it chooses to use the white mana just for Yasharn. I think that this Bant deck is just that same sentiment times 100, right? Where, like, okay, we're just the exact same deck, we have very similar top end, except for I have Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, which is arguably a better card than any card in the Azorius deck. But on top of that, I have Nissa Who Shakes the World, which is kind of the top-end card of the Sultai deck. And very subtly, you have a card like Narset Parter of Veils, which is actually good against other people's Uros. Not unbeatable against other people's Uros, but pretty good. And pretty good against a lot of the other sort of chip shot card advantage things. But then, to go back to the Wrath of God that you mentioned, Patrick, as long as you're not dead, this is a big if, right? As long as you're not dead, because there are, some haste creatures may be involved, somebody could go off against you with Muxus, they get a lot of material, and you can, undo. Control Z that. Yeah,
I mean, the ability for Wrath of God to catch you up against goblins, it's quite real. What do you think about the commit memory angle? I mean, it's not that it's not like it's just standard that you have to play one Search for Azcanta and 2 Shark Typhoons and whatnot, but having a diverse spread of victory conditions often benefits decks like this. But the one commit memory is kind of a throwback joint a little bit, right?
Oh, I mean, that card was such a card when combined with Torrential Gearhulk, right? No Torrential Gearhulk here, but still, you have commit memory. This is what's good about it, right? On the front end, it's just like a forecasting cost. I don't know how you want to call it. Interaction.
Venser card. Without the body.
Yeah, like whatever interaction card it is, right? But then
it puts it on top of the deck, but yeah.
I mean, I think it just has this flexible text of, do they have a spell that's going to beat me on the stack, or do they have a permanent that's going to beat me in play? I can go either way.
Remember, part of the one of the big things you want to commit in this format is other people's Uros, because if they pay the 5 cards to actually just escape it from their graveyard, by commit memorying it, you're first of all, they can't. I mean, they still don't draw the card or play the land or any of that stuff, right? But if you had just counterspelled it, they could just play it again next turn. Whereas if you commit it, they can't actually play it next turn.
For that matter, once you've committed it, you have potential access to memory, right? And memory has the magical ability to undo at least part of the card advantage that comes with Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, right? Because you shuffle your graveyard into your library as part of the memory part, it, undoes your graveyard. So if you were filling your graveyard to fuel escape, it undoes that. And if you had Uro in your graveyard, he's back in your deck where he's less likely to do any damage unless you draw him.
I also just like this sort of an approach of having all this cheap permission with a bunch of Teferi Hero Dominarias. If you're expecting everybody else, and Narsets, if you're expecting everybody else to be overloaded on fatal pushes and such.
Oh, I mean,
you can really pick apart the black removal with with Narset and Teferi as your and Nissa for that matter.
Yeah, I love that angle as well, right? Like people with eliminates and so forth have got a bunch of dead weight. And Narset really does seem to me like the Trump spell. If you've got Narset in play, like, you might not be very good at counterspelling a Hydroid Krasis, but my god, Narset is counterspelling the next 6 actions of the Hydroid Krasis. That's really good.
I'm also a fan of Whirlwind Denial.
Yeah, that one's okay to me.
You're not a buyer on Whirlwind Denial, huh?
It's fine. It's full on fine.
Is the issue just you're paying for the anti-storm type stuff and you're just not getting enough? Like, that just doesn't come up enough in the format?
I'm just thinking, like, look, this is a 3-mana counterspell most of the time, right? Like, fancy stuff aside, right? It's mostly a 3-mana counterspell, of which there are 2 copies in the deck. I'm not convinced this is so much better than more Sinister Sabotage, another card that is played in the deck, or for that matter, more Tail's Ends. Right? I think like Tail's End.
I love Tail's End, by the way.
Is the weird counterspell that I think is really fantastic in this format.
I also like the one in the sideboard.
I feel like maybe 4 Tail's End after sideboarding is not crazy.
You always want to play 4 of everything, man. I love it.
Okay, imagine you're playing against one of the Sultai-ish decks. Like, those decks have got some number of Uro, might be 4. Some number of Yasharn, might be 4. Some number of Nissa Who Shakes the World, probably 4. Right? Like, 4 Tail's End amongst those 12 cards, not to mention other weird stuff that they might have that I can't think of off the top of my head, does not seem crazy to me. Even if it's only like 6, right? They don't have extra Yasharns. They don't side in extra Yasharns. Don't you want to just, like, tempo Tail's End Uro sometimes? Don't you just want to, like... I think... I cannot imagine something I would rather do against their 5-mana spell, being Nissa Who Shakes the World, than Tail's End it, and then leave up my own mana for some sort of, like, I don't know, Growth Spiral, some other kind of sweet action. This deck doesn't have a lot of sweet instants, but, I don't know, activating my Flip Search for Escanta, that's a thing I could do. Cycle my Shark Typhoon. The 2-mana-ness of Tail's End against expensive cards is really attractive.
I think you might be underestimating what makes Whirlwind Denial. Part of the reason you're even going to the trouble is because of the interaction with Nissa Who Shakes the World. Like, I mean, obviously sometimes you'll be able to just untap a breeding pool, right?
Sure.
But we're talking about a deck with Fabled Passages and Forests. Like, you can really you can get into the spot where you just drop Nissa, untap a forest, and now you have Whirlwind Denial up, even though you only had 1 extra mana.
So just like legitimate hard counterness of it?
Yeah, the fact that Whirlwind Denial, I mean, obviously there's a million other of those 2 and a blue counter something unless they pay 4. And I don't know for sure that Whirlwind Denial is actually that much better than any of the other ones of those, but it's the fact that it's single blue. Because if you notice, this mixture, Disdainful Stroke, Essence Scatter, Tail's End, Commit Memory, there's a real biasing for single blue. And part of that is the fact that this is a deck with 9 dedicated non-blue sources, plus Fabled Passages that actually have to go that way sometimes.
Extraordinarily fair comment, especially, I think, given the last one where, you've got these basic forests that Fabled Passages might be getting. This deck has a Castle Ardenvale. One thing
That's a little ambitious, personally.
It's highly synergistic with your argument around Whirlwind Denial single blue being a difference maker. One thing I think is crazy, though, Patrick, I know I am the egregious 4 of guy, but 3 Growth Spiral?
I can't co-sign 3 Growth Spiral.
I mean, I'm not happy with 2 Uro and 1 Yasharn either, but like...
I am. That part I actually like. In this deck, don't get me wrong, I'd rather just play with more powerful cards. This deck Uro is not as good in this deck as it is in the Sultai deck. Thoughtseize plus Uro is a hell of a drug. But, like, in this deck, Uro is much more of a, it's a mediocre growth spiral with applications long-term, a long game. It just gives you other angles, you know? This is a lot more of a blue-white deck splashing Nissa that happens to use Uro.
I can buy that.
That said, I generally prefer just playing with more powerful cards, and Uro is the best card in this deck. Not in this deck, but it's the most powerful card intrinsically, you know?
It's the most powerful card available, I think, in part being shown by its dominance in the format in terms of popularity.
But, setting aside the, variations of Uro, well, actually, there is one more variation of Uro. Did you see the Sultai Paradox Engine deck?
No. So, which one was that?
Yeah, so there's some Simic and Sultai Paradox Engine decks. A lot of them are just blue-green, but Kai Buddy's take on it, this is that Emery Lurker of the Lock, Chromatic Sphere, Mind Stone, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. It's like lots of artifacts like Mox Amber, Mind Stone, Chromatic Sphere, and so on. And then it's got Paradox Engine, right? So whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. So every time you cast a spell, your Mox Amber untaps, your Mind Stone untaps, and then also you've got Llanowar Elves, and importantly, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, which makes it so that your Llanowar Elves tap for 2, your Mind Stone taps for 2, your Mox Amber taps for 2, and also Paradox Engine gives you a little bit of a Splinter Twin thing going in a way. It's kind of a Jeskai Ascendancy almost. Every time you play a spell, you get to untap Emery, and then you tap Emery, and you play a spell. And then you, from playing your spell, untap Emery. Because as long as you have artifacts in your graveyard that cost as much or less than your non-land permanents tapped for mana, you just get them all.
So if you've got...
And if you have something like Mox Amber, you get infinite mana. And if you have something like Chromatic Sphere, you can draw your deck. And same with Mind Stone. You can draw your deck.
So if you've got a Paradox Engine, Emery Lurker of the Lock, and a pair of Mox Ambers, you're rocking and rolling with this one, right?
Right, you're doing that Kethis thing, and it's a little clumsier, but of course, it's legal and uses a bunch of cards that are highly synergistic for other reasons. But yeah, if you've got a couple, you can just keep going Mox Amber, untap Emery, and then tap Emery, play Mox Amber, and just keep going.
And then the kill is like, draw your deck, whatever, get to more or less no cards, get a bunch of mana from the mechanisms we've talked about, lay down Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, rock and roll.
Right, you just drop Jace and try to draw a card with no cards in your deck so you win. And remember, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy is also a victory condition because, like, that Mox Amber scenario we talked about, you're getting infinite mana, right? And when you have infinite mana and Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, you can cycle through your whole deck and get to put everything you want in play, but that also includes Uros and such, So you can draw even more cards. You don't have to just... you can use the Uros over and over again, too. Like, you get to play all 3 Uros out of your deck, and you also get to play them out, you escape them out of your graveyards. You just have so many more ways to just keep looking for cards to get you going. But
so
at the end of the day,
what you're saying is you can compound your infinite mana and card draw engines with even more infinite card draw and mana.
Well, if you don't have a card draw engine yet besides Kinnan, then you can convert Kinnan into a tutor to find card draw engines.
That's hot.
And then obviously Tamio is like, helps pull the whole thing. It's both a card advantage engine and a potential backup victory condition, but it's also disruptive. You know, spells and abilities your opponent's control can't cause you to discard cards or sacrifice permanents.
So if you're one of those folks with the Thoughtseize plan, Tamiyo can protect you from that.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And if they got you before the Tamiyo, you can lay the Tamiyo and get back the thing that they got. And pretty rocking and rolling there as well. This is my analysis of this deck because this is largely an MTG Arena format and deck designed for MTG Arena play. Seems awesome. Lots and lots of clicking. I mean, like, a lot of clicking.
Definitely. I personally think this is... It may be fun just because it's exotic. I think you'd be better served. Like, if your goal is just maximizing win percentage, then I would just play an Uro deck instead of this. Like a more traditional Uro deck.
Yep.
But I do want to note, though, that while a lot of people play Simic, I do think that Kai playing Sultai, if you're going to go this way, I really like the light splash of black removal. I think you just buy, and he's got 2 Fatal Pushes main deck with Maelstrom Pulse and Vraska Golgari Queen in the sideboard. I think you just make your life a lot easier if you have access to the black mana. And we're talking about a pretty easy splash, given that you already have Mox Amber and Chromatic Sphere.
Yeah. I think it's an unusual splash. This is essentially a combo deck, right? So I think it's an unusual splash for a combo deck, though. Like, you don't typically...
Oh, it's definitely unusual. Definitely.
And especially the sideboard, right? Like, if there were more... If somebody said to me, okay, Kai Bude, one of the early masters of High Tide, one of the greatest players of all time, is going to rock and roll with a dedicated combo deck. He's got a black splash. And I'm telling you already, he's got a couple of Fatal Pushes as the black splash in the main deck. And more black cards in the sideboard. I would imagine it was something more along the lines of a Thoughtseize than something more along the lines of a Vraska Golgari Queen or Maelstrom Pulse. But I would be wrong.
I mean, they're at least good cards, right?
These are, and no question. Actually, all of these are good cards. Like, even if this is a weird combo deck, with the exception of Paradox Engine itself, these are like all good cards. These are all cards that see play extensively in other archetypes, including fair
Prophetic Prism is a little loose.
I've played a Prophetic Prism in a white control deck.
Same, but it doesn't mean it's not a little loose. Just on its own. It's not like it's what you want to be doing with 2 mana.
I had that, like, I can't remember what the name of it. It's like a 5 or 6 mana artifact that, like, it could do everything for, like, one color and a colorless, and, like, red could hit them for 3, white can gain life or something.
Yep.
I just had Prophetic Prism so I could activate that thing.
The nice thing about Prophetic Prism in this deck, though, is that you actually net mana because of Kinnan.
Yeah.
So did you see the new evolution of the it's the equivalent of Tron. There's no Tron, but it's the colorless deck. But people have taken to playing black in it. The
kind of colorless ramp deck.
Yeah, built around Forsaken Monument. It's the whole Forsaken Monument deck with like Karn, the Great Creator, and Ugin, the Ineffable, and the Spirit Dragon. Top end of Ulamog, and then you just get to use a ton of colorless utility lands, and you've got Hedron and Archive and Guardian Idol and Mindstone. So you've got like a ton of colorless ramping. But the black splash, it's kind of interesting. 4 copies of Extinction Event, which is not a hard splash, all things considered.
But that's just full stop, right? Like, there's 4 copies of Extinction Event in the main deck, no black sideboard cards.
But the 4 if near dead lands are really key. Having that extra form of interaction, it's not like it's that good, but the opportunity cost is so low because you're tapping it for a colorless.
It's just essentially 0, right?
It's close to free, so having outs, having a way to not just convert your land into business, but also to potentially remove a problematic permanent. It's just, it's much appreciated. You
So
know?
the activation is a little tough, right? It's double B. It's not nothing to get the If Near Deadlands going.
No, and that's part of the reason why Prophetic Prism is showing up.
Yeah.
It's not like Prophetic Prism really does a whole lot in this deck.
A 100% increase in the number of Prophetic Prisms over Kai's Simic deck at 2. But there's like Aether Hub for B. Like there are ways to get black mana. It's just, I think that If Near Deadlands,
Cascading Cataract, it's the classic Golos for Cascading Cataract plan as well.
Yeah. One Golos, one Cascading Cataract. Gotta go crazy.
You just keep going, man.
I mean, to be fair, there's one Golos in the sideboard, right? And that's achievable with a variety of Karn the Great creators in the main deck.
So what do you think, man?
I love this deck. I think it's awesome. I like it for the following reasons. It's super cool. It's much cooler than any of the decks that choose to ramp using Growth Spiral and Uro. I think that Forsaken Monument is really powerful, right? Like, it's highly comparable to build-around cards like Mirari's Wake from years past. I think, like, it makes use of a lot of really, really powerful interactions. For example, the combination of, like, Ugin the Ineffable and, Ugin the Ineffable's, like, discounting ability alongside 2 mana artifacts like Guardian Idol or Maze Mind Tome, which turns those things to be like very, very cost effective, like basically free. I think that's really cool. I think you've heard me use the word cool like 4 or 6 times at this point. I feel like its card power could be largely preserved and not be a black deck versus being, maybe a Growth Spiral Uro deck. And you get to do a lot of the same things. You don't get to play Extinction Event, maybe. Or maybe you do. I don't know. Those cards... I mean, Extinction Event is not a difficult splash for an Uro Growth Spiral deck either. I don't know how important some of these utility lands are, right? Like I could just do without it.
If it was more about blue-white, you'd start getting more mileage out of it. It's tough when you're playing in Sultai and they're not giving you big enough edges to overcome how blunt of an instrument people's Uros are.
Like, this deck clearly is high on power level, right? It tops up on Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. It's got Ugin the Spirit Dragon. My objection to it, and I'm using the word objection with like pretty cloudy air quotes on this, is just like, you can accomplish a lot of what this deck wants to do while playing much more powerful early and mid-game cards. You don't give up very much to do that. Like, the If Near Deadlands that's not a reason to play a color versus other colors, in my opinion. Right? You get to retain a lot of the other stuff. Obviously, you do have to reimagine the mana base a little bit. But if you're largely colorless anyway, nothing's stopping you from playing Karn the Great Creator. In fact, I'd love to play Karn the Great Creator on the 3rd turn, which I guess, to be fair, this deck does pretty well with cards like Mindstone.
Very well.
So, I don't know. I do love this deck. I have to say, like, just emotionally, cool factor-wise, give me a check plus, give me another check plus. I just don't think that it is... I think, like, its edges are ephemeral relative to the stuff that can be done by some of the more established popularity players.
Well, here's an alternative desert deck for you. In red-green, people, the Gruul aggro decks have taken to playing Ramen Up Ruins, which is obviously the traditionally more powerful desert anyway. But like we've been seeing in some of the other formats, these Gruul decks, not playing any actual removal, with the asterisk exception of Shatterskull Smashing as a one of, and some people as a two of, the reserving the Magma Spray, Upbraid, Domri's Ambush, all that type of action for the sideboard. And this is like it's a Collected Company deck, which we often think of like Bant and things like that for Collected Company. But actual red-green aggro, like an Embercleave Collected Company deck, is kind of an interesting blend. This is also a more of a main phase Collected Company deck than I think we normally see. The fact that you could potentially flip up Burning Tree Emissary, which could then give you mana to play a Haster, or Gallia of the Endless Dance, or Zerta Goblin, or Gruul Spellbreaker, or even just Rampaging Ferocidon against somebody who might have something with, if you're dealing with any kind of lifelinker.
But I don't know. Uro himself, right? Rampaging Ferocidon is nobody's really that good against Uro, but this does take a little of the edge off of Uro.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is like a surprising number of formerly banned cards. Burning Tree Emissary, Rampaging Ferocidon, Ramunap Ruins, and it's not like Collected Company, Embercleave, and a lot of these cards, even Bone Crusher Giant. This is like a lot of powerful, cheap red green aggro cards.
So I like this deck quite a bit. I think outside of like the most established decks, being largely Autumn's Goblins deck or the various kind of Sultai, Uro, Yasharn kind of center decks, this is probably my favorite archetype. A couple of reasons. One, I love the fact that it can play so many different plans, right? So this deck can be like a turn 1 Llanowar Elves beatdown deck, right? You can be like turn 1 Llanowar Elves, Rampaging Ferocidon, Collected Company, go crazy. Second of all, this deck plays the highly, highly underrated Gallia of the Endless Dance. This card is very potent. So Gallia of the Endless Dance is red-green for a 2/2 haste satyr, legendary satyr, and it has the text, other satyrs you control get +1/+1 and have haste. There's not a lot of other satyrs in this deck, are there?
No.
However, it has the additional text, whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may discard a card at random. If you do, draw 2 cards. A deck that has Collected Company, or for that matter, just has 32 creatures in the main deck, has a high likelihood of being able to attack with the requisite number of creatures to turn Gallia from which is a pretty efficient creature, right? A 2/2 pump creature for 2 mana with haste, right? Into also kind of a walking, dare I say, running Jameday Tome. So it's got that. It's got spoilers like Scavenging Ooze, 2/2 Scavenging Ooze. Like, that card list legitimately eats their Uro sometimes. That's very good. Against decks like Jund Sacrifice that have other escape creatures, other graveyard interactions, highly in-demand card. This deck has got Klothys, God of Destiny. I mean, even less, I think, for the graveyard-eating portion of Klothys. Like, this deck has a large number of pips that it gets into the battlefield due to Collected Company, due to just having a high concentration of creatures. You just have like this giant indestructible guy that's very difficult to deal with. I mean, what are you going to do?
So, what do you think about the decision? The majority of these people play Questing Beast, but not everybody does. And I'm wondering what you think about the inclusion of 1 or 2 Questing Beasts to supplement the Collected Company top end.
So I think that's like a really tough cut, right? Like, those 2 cards are the only forecasting cost cards we're talking about considering here, right? Like, so the version that we're looking at...
Yeah, I mean, some people sideboard stuff like Hazaret and Chandra, Torch of Defiance.
Oh, sure, even this deck
there's really nothing besides Questing Beast.
It has Rekindling Phoenix in the sideboard, right? I think
I
agree with not playing Questing Beast, and I know that that's like against everything I've probably ever said for red-green Embercleave decks, but I feel like your eggs are in the Collected Company basket, and I think you just want to make that part of your deck go with a really high level of regularity. None of these cards is individually as good as Questing Beast in terms of a combat creature in play, but a lot of them do a pretty good Questing Beast impression, right? So if you look at like Bone Crusher Giant, 4 power, even less mana, a lot of these creatures that are like 2/2 hasters for 2, Zerta Goblin, Gallia of the Endless Dance, they're like half as big as Questing Beast, just as hasty, half as much cost, right? So you might not get 4/4 for 4 hasting in, but you have the ability, for example, to just play 2/2 hasters and get the same amount of damage in. In fact, that could potentially be advantageous for you if you've got like a pellet collector draw, right? Just having more things that are going on earlier in the game, especially. So I could totally love Questing Beast Embercleave. That interaction has been one of my favorites since it was printed, right? Like since those cards ever came out. I love the fact that Questing Beast just kills everything and does 9 trample, at least. But I understand in this archetype, let's go company.
So it sounds like, are you on board with Klothys? I'm guessing you like the Spellbreaker, Klothys, and Rampaging Ferocidon. Do you think there's any merit? Oh, and Bonecrusher Giant, of course. Do you think there's any merit to Kazandu Mammoth or I don't know, like Rada, Heart of Keld, or Garrick's Harbinger?
I'll address those one at a time.
Sure.
The Mammoth I like a lot. I think the Mammoth. I mean, I would rather just if only I'd got one. I'd rather have a Mammoth than a Shatterskull Smashing. Right, this deck only plays one Shatterskull Smashing. I do like the Mammoth. I like Rada, Heart of Keld. Only okay in this deck. I mean, actually, I could totally see that being a serviceable sideboard card if you thought you were gonna go longer, grind, anything kind of like that. It's a little less offensive than I'd like for a deck like this. And then Garrick's Harbinger, and I don't know. I can imagine that being again probably a pretty good sideboard card. I don't think I'd want to play it main deck.
You don't think it's good enough against Sultai? My worry is always that they're going to Extinction Event odd anyway. So it's not like you're even doing anything.
Like, I feel like this is how I'm imagining things going. I have a Llanowar Elf on the first turn. I'd much rather play a Rampaging Ferocidon under their Uro, or something along the lines of a Gruul Spellbreaker, and then just get in for haste, right? Then a card that like they might just 1-for-1. Like that's the thing that maybe I've inherited more of the red side of the red-green when I think about that. Because anyway, you have this great reset in... Maybe I'm arguing against myself. I guess flipping over the Harbinger with Collected Company when they're tapped out for Extinction Event is probably the awesomest thing you could do. Actually, now that I say that out loud, that's freaking fantastic. So, yeah, maybe it's a great sideboard card as a result. But I think I'd just rather have... I mean, Klothys is just individually very powerful, right? It's difficult to interact with. It does different things in different matchups, and all those things are good. Rampaging Ferocidon, like you said before, former banned card, really, really enormous amount of interaction against both the life gain of Uro and, anybody who wants to play smaller than you with, especially going wide. I like the creature selection. If anybody... It's weird because I just said I like the haste on Gruul Spellbreaker. If anybody, I think Gruul Spellbreaker is my least favorite 3-drop in this deck, which, at 3 copies, it's certainly less valuable than Bonecrusher Giant.
What did you think about the evolution of the that dual caster mage combo deck? We talked about it a couple months back, but people have kind of they've been continuing to evolve the archetype, and it's getting better. It's not like it's become some major force in the metagame yet, but they've made some important advancements, and this is around the interaction between dual caster mage and like when you actually, when dual caster mage enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. And what you're trying to do is set up some kind of a neoform situation. And when you eventually you're trying to get into play things like Niv Mizzet Perun is like a powerful top end, obviously, but then the big thing is Combat Celebrant or Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort for whenever you go off, being able to actually just attack all hasty in one turn.
How crazy that Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort is one of the linchpins of an archetype that people might play. I guess that's pretty consistent with just weird cards going in combo decks, right? Obviously, Niv Mizzet Perun, it's often game as a fair card. What's going on in this deck with Niv Mizzet Perun as an unfair card?
Well, so part of what's happening with Niv Mizzet Perun, its primary use is that it's just if you have access to tutoring, your deck's full of bad cards, but you can get any one card. Niv Mizzet Perun is like the one card to get. But that's, this isn't like a deck that's like using it as the mechanism because you're just drawing your whole deck and that's how you win,
I mean, a Valakut Awakening with Niv Mizzet Perun in play seems pretty fantastic, though.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of things, like it's not like Wall of Blossoms is any slouch either.
You get the Niv Mizzet Trigger, and then you get the Niv Mizzet Trigger.
But man, at the end of the day, what more do you really want than to just Neoform,
I do think this deck is a little clunky, right? Like, Dualcaster Mage has to get cast at a certain time. This deck doesn't... I mean, I assume that you're trying to do this with your own stuff, right? Copy instants and sorceries. This deck doesn't even have that many instants and sorceries.
Yeah, but you're really just trying to copy Neoform.
All right. I'll file this one away as could get better, which I think is the zone that you had it in initially.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate what they're trying to do, but I don't think you do quite enough yet. Anything else jump out at you in the format? I mean,
yeah. What do you think about the Golgari Stompy type deck? Which is, so we talked a couple seconds ago about that red-green collected company deck. The Golgari Stompy deck it's a black-green collected company deck, and rather than playing with Embercleave, dun-dun-dun, not very surprising probably, it's got 3 copies of the Great Henge as its big artifact. But this deck's, it starts on...
It's mainly you're black for the Rotting Regisaur and maybe like Scrap Heap Scrounger, right?
Yep. Scrap Heap
Plus sideboard interaction like pushes and Thussies.
Yeah. This deck has got like, start on Llanowar Elves or Gilded Goose, follow up with like a Baller 3. You can follow up with like Steel Leaf Champion, which is obviously a 5/4, Rotting Regisaur, which is, an infinite. Then, once you have to start discarding things, you can discard cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger. Once you've got one of these really powerful creatures in play, and I do mean powerful as in they have high power on turn 2, it can severely discount the Great Henge. Same deal. Casting costs 3 or less creatures. You can cast Collected Company as early as turn 3 in this deck. Drop something that's big enough, untap, land the Great Henge. And then I think the thing that's weird about this deck is it could potentially get the jump on you with like this second turn 5 power thing. It can semi go wide with like kind of a Pelt Collector Scavenging Ooze sort of incremental +1/+1 counters curve. But it really has this other mode where you're like semi-accelerate, super powerful fair and grindy mid-game.
In theory, like if I didn't know what else was going on in the format, I would like the look of this deck. There's a lot of things to like. It uses its mana efficiently. It plays a lot of powerful cards. It's not going to draw a bunch of dead cards. My big issue with this deck is that I think it's just you can't beat Extinction Event.
What if they name even? No?
No, man. And it's not like you want to play against Wrath of God either.
I can't argue with you there. This deck is like... Unless you have the Great Henge already in play, this is the definition of a deck that does not want to play against Wrath of God.
Right. So that's my issue is I think it's a sweet deck. I don't think it's the right time for it yet. The last deck I wanted to look at, dude. So what's up with Aetherworks Marvel not really getting there yet? Like, people have been experimenting with trying to find a mix of like Ulamog and Genesis Ultimatum and Ugin but what so far nobody has cracked the code on how to make energy a tier 1-5 deck, even let alone a tier 1 deck.
Is it because like you've got a dominant deck that has access to cheap permission?
I think that's a big part of it. And the people who don't play cheap permission are so fast. So I don't think it's like I just think that the format is pretty hostile to it at the moment. But if we see a rebalancing of the format around aggro and more of the stuff like, for instance, those enchantment aura decks or the colorless Tron deck or Burn or Stompy or...
I mean, in order for that to happen, I mean, you have to imagine that no fewer than one key card in the format has got to get banned, right? Probably more than one. Because if you're like, all right, Uro is the problem that, and I'm not just saying Uro is the problem with the capital P, I mean like Uro is the problem that is preventing this other exploration. You can't just ban Uro and then not expect Muxus to take Uro's place. That's the...
Yeah, but I think you do a little bit better against Muxus personally.
No doubt on that. I mean, there's no doubt on you could do better than playing against a deck that has a faster, powerful card advantage engine than also cheap permission. Like,
right.
I'm in agreement. I'm just saying, like, there are too many things that are currently anyway better than that. But maybe just taking kind of the Uro mid-range decks, Spant decks, Sultai, Yasharn variations on those decks out of the equation. I mean, you're still like, Azorius just won. Right? Like,
yeah, dude, people play blue-black control also.
Yeah, pretty good players play blue-black control.
Yeah. I just think that Historic right now is too much about cheap permission. And the tough part is that if you try to tune your deck to be the kind of deck that can just power through the permission, you get run over by the aggro decks.
Just want to do a real quick take, just real super quick on the Dimir control deck. And I only ask because the template master of the Dimir control deck is none other than your fellow Hall of Famer, William Baby Huey Jensen.
Oh, yeah, one of the all-time greats. This is, in my opinion, a little bit of a for the love. You know, don't get me wrong. It's a well-tuned list. It's just I don't think that this is what you want to play if your only goal is to just maximize win percentage. It's fine, but yeah, I don't know, man. It's a lot of reactive cards and some draw twos, and you're just really trying to win with Torrential Gearhulk and the Scarab God instead of Uro and Planeswalkers.
So the Scarab God is obviously the first card that that jumps out at you on this list, but the second card that jumps out at you is the Torrential Gearhulk ×3 in Billy Jensen's
with
list.
2 copies of Commit Memory?
That's exactly where I was going to go. Mentioned it with the Bant deck. They were playing 1 copy of Commit Memory. This deck's got 2 copies. And it's got the full, I'm going to commit memory, I'm going to commit your thing, then I'm going to Torrential Gearhulk, at the end of your turn or whatever, mess you up with memory, rock and roll.
Well, you got to remember, this is really a combo deck that's built around having Narset in play when you commit memory.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When you have Narset in play and you memory, you draw 7 and they draw 1.
So what you're saying
or
is...
0 if you do it. Like if you have Gearhulk, you can Gearhulk, but yeah, basically commit memory with Narset is that's a really big game.
You're saying that they should restrict this card in a bigger format, maybe? No,
I'm not saying that. Oh, Narset, yeah Narset.
They already did. So that's one of the reasons why I think this deck isn't just for the love. This is pretty powerful. I get it, from sort of a rock, and I mean that by throwing a rock through somebody's window perspective. Uro is a more powerful card overall, and a more powerful way to win, and a more powerful card drawing engine than Narset. But Narset matches up really nicely against Uro, especially if they're otherwise not very good at applying pressure to a planeswalker in play. So start there, and then once you're there, like Narset is just like giving you a small advantage. You've got a decent amount of lands, right? You've got 26 lands, 4 Mind Stones. So you have a high likelihood to keep hitting your land drops, especially when you're playing 1-mana cyclers like Censor or Hieroglyphic Illumination. Your counterspell here is Sinister Sabotage, again, helping you hit your land drops. And then I don't think it's difficult to get Commit Memory into the graveyard. Once it's there, on their turn, Patrick, you can do the combo. And not only can you do the combo, you've annihilated their hand. If they have 14 cards in hand, all of a sudden they've got none, right? And you've got a 5/6.
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically that's true.
So
I love, every once in a while seeing these throwback decks where it's like, man, this sure is the kind of deck that we would have played a decade ago, 15 years ago.
This is like a sweet Drago deck, right?
Yeah.
It's got
back before it was just nothing but haymakers,
I mean, even like Cling to Dust, that card is like a nice little Whispers of the Muse impression.
Yeah.
It's actually a great Whispers of the Muse impression against their Uro. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm crazy. It's
not really much of a Whispers of the Muse against their Uro, but it is a Whispers of the Muse in general. It's
like a great Whispers of the Muse, against their Uro.
Okay. Awesome, dude. See you next week when hopefully Uro's big.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were the key to find. Magic gave me purpose and drive. The game, the love, it kept me alive. Visions of better weather, light inside. See through the mirage, gotta survive. Dreaming, someday I find a way. Gotta repay the game we play.